Hello, welcome to the Saroy channel. Thank you so very much for joining me this evening, wherever you are in the world. And I do hope that you're doing exceedingly well and that life's treating you very kindly. And I just want to send each and every one of you loads and loads of love. And I've got a fabulous story for you tonight, so make sure you get that lovely hot cup of cocoa because you're definitely going to need it. And sending love to each and every one of you, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Rachel, and my Bigfoot encounter happened when I was about 13 years old in 1993, and had such a profound dramatic effect on my life that it even influenced the direction of my life path in later years. I'm now a firm, staunch believer that there is no such thing as coincidence in this world, and that my interaction with this extraordinary creature was not an act of random chance, but a part of the great universal grand design and divine plan of the rich, vibrant tapestry of our human experience that I believe was clearly mapped out for me, possibly before I was even born. I believe we're all here to have a human experience in our physical bodies, and that our life paths lead us to those experiences that are often propelled by the life choices we choose to make and the roads we embark upon. In my opinion, nothing is ever an accident, because whether an experience turns out to be good or bad, inevitably we are being chiselled and moulded to become the very best versions of ourselves, and the unique individuals that we were clearly ordained to be. The more we spiritually evolve as human beings, the more enlightened, compassionate and loving we invariably become. Well, that's my belief anyway. I grew up in West Virginia with my older brother Nicholas and my younger sister Kate, and we grew up in an idyllic rural location not too far from the town of Charleston, and we lived in an exquisitely picture-perfect log cabin nestled in the heart of the emerald green valley and surrounded by a backdrop of the most gorgeous panoramic mountainous views and dreamy forests that literally stretched back for miles. I considered myself to be the luckiest girl in the entire world to grow up in such an extraordinary, beautiful, idyllic, heartwarming and magical place. My two siblings and I would spend the hot summer days cooling down in the woods, where the canopy of large trees would block out the heat of the day and allow just enough sun to dapple the forest floor in a very pretty light. I would play with my two siblings in the woods for hours on end, and we would play games like hide and seek, or even kick a ball around in the open clearing, and it was always the best place in the world to search for Easter eggs or to have picnics during the summer. We were fortunate because there was a gorgeous stream that travailed through the woods with a swift, forceful current that was surrounded by very large, imposing rocky boulders that were so magnificent that they looked like large works of art, and some were covered with beautiful layers of green moss. My all-time favourite spot to frequent in the woods was the enchanting rock pool with its imposing gushing waterfall, and as kids we would swim in that clear water almost every day during the summer months, often joined by other local kids who thought the woods on our land were like a piece of heaven. Naturally, living in this idyllic part of the world, we were exposed to the indigenous wildlife, and as invariably with such a great water supply meandering through the woods, it did attract a large deer population, including the inevitable raccoons and squirrels. It would seem that nobody hunted in our family, and I believe the animals saw our property as a safe retreat. Growing up, my mother stayed at home taking care of us and manning the fort, while my father worked in Charleston as a banker. One day when I was about 13 years old, I remember my brother and sister were doing their homework in the kitchen under my mother's supervision. As I'd finished my homework, I had some free time on my hands. It was a very sweltering hot day, and I decided I wanted to read a book. I remember it was an exciting mystery novel, and I couldn't wait to see what would happen next. But I decided I'd go and read it in the woods, because it was so refreshingly cool and breezy in there, and besides, I loved being outdoors. I grabbed a bottle of fresh spring water and a picnic rug, and off I went. I remember laying the picnic blanket underneath an oak tree, and I began to read my book. I took a sip of water and looked up from my book for a moment, and that was when I saw this huge pile of what I can only describe looked like an old dirty grey rug that was lying under this tree. I remember wondering who had thrown it out and why they had tossed it in the woods like that. It was very peculiar because our land was private property, so I did not know of anyone who would be throwing nasty old rugs in the wood unless there was a vagrant trespassing on our land, and this would not be the first time that had happened to us. I took another sip of water, and then I remember being almost convinced that the strange rug had curiously moved. Suddenly I was absolutely certain that there was someone sleeping under that dirty old rag. I knew my dad would not be happy to learn about another annoying trespasser that we would invariably have to chase off our land. Feeling more than a little cheesed off by this unwelcome visitor, I ventured towards the old smelly rug, and almost gagged because it smelt so disgusting and vile. I tugged the rug violently with my hands and realised that the rug seemed to be attached to a living creature. I was completely gobsmacked and mesmerised at the same time. I could not imagine what it was, because it was large enough to be a bear, but this was clearly no bear, and it was too big to be a grey shaggy dog. I was very confused. Suddenly the creature looked up at me with what I can only describe as these bright yellow alluring eyes that peered at me through a sea of grey hair. On closer inspection, and to my utter amazement, I realised that this critter had human-like characteristics, but it wasn't human, and ape-like characteristics, but it wasn't an ape. I'd never seen, nor had I ever heard of a creature like this before, but whatever it was, it clearly needed me. I could sense that the creature was so ecstatic to see me and seemed reassured by my presence, as if in some way I brought him a measure of great comfort. I could see the critter was beyond help. It was an elderly male, and I knew instantly that it was dying. I have been around dying animals enough in my young life, living so close to nature as I did, that I knew the imminent signs before me. I put my hand on the creature and stroked his hair tenderly, and the gratitude I witnessed on its face was immeasurable. I knew it did not want to be alone, as he lay there, and who could blame him? I sat beside him, putting my hand on his colossal, emaciated body and stroking him very gently. I could feel and sense his gratitude as he let out a few grunts under his breath. I began to sing to him very gently, and he seemed soothed by my voice. When he groaned in pain, he clutched an area of his body, and that was when I would massage the tender spot ever so lightly with my hands. I kept saying to him, "It's going to be all right, just you see. I promise you, it's going to be all right." I spoke to him in very gentle whispers. "It's going to be all right. Everything's going to be fine. I promise you, don't you worry. Everything's going to be fine." I do not want to underestimate how Herculean this thing was. It was almost like I was stroking a rhino or a blue whale, something with an extensive surface area that had very titanic proportions. I could tell that the critter was suffering from extreme muscle wastage and was skeletal, scrawly, decrepit and weathered by the ravages of a very long life. I think he must have just suddenly passed out and stumbled under the tree where I found him, and his body began to shut down. I was so pleased to be with him in these last moments because his family possibly hadn't realised his impending fate. I imagine he was engaging in his usual routine and was struck down very suddenly, and as far as his family members were concerned, I imagine they were oblivious of his dramatic physical decline and deterioration. If they could not be there for him, at least I was. I remember grabbing the strange critter's hands, but they were so big that I could only squeeze a couple of his sausage-sized fingers, and when I did this, he made this very thankful grunt, as if I was reassuring him and watching over him. I know it sounds very odd, but I felt such a connection towards this creature. Possibly it was because of his humanness in the appearance, but somehow I felt such extraordinary love and compassion for him. This hairy humanoid opened its gorgeous golden eyes and looked at me with such incredible warmth. I kept reassuring him over and over again with soothing, calming words. I could feel the tears welling up in the back of my eyes, because I didn't want this extraordinary, unique and special beast to die. I think he sensed my shrivelled, distraught emotions, because he reached out to touch me, as if to reassure me, which was so endearing that I was touched to the quick. I mean, this creature was dying for goodness sake, and it was actually trying to soothe me and calm me down. I opened my bottle of water and poured a little down its throat, which seemed to quench his dry throat, and he drank the cold liquid gratefully, all the while watching me with curious eyes. I do not know what you are, or who you are, I told him, but I know that you are very beautiful and very special, and I know that I shall never forget you as long as I live. I said this, cradling my body close to the creature's as if I'd known it all my life. I may have only met you a second ago, I told him, but I love you, and I always will. I knew he wanted me there, and I was so happy to be there for him. I put my hand on his thin, sinewy expanse of broad chest, and I could feel the heart beating very slightly, like a battery that's running out of steam, and growing fainter and fainter and fainter by the second. I knew it wouldn't be long now, before he finally breathed his last. I nudged the creature very gently and looked at him tenderly, and for a moment our eyes met. "It won't be long now," I said reassuringly. "Then you'll be going off to a wonderful, beautiful place." The creature grunted as if he understood my words, breathed his last, and finally he slipped away and died. I remember bursting into tears and shaking his body as violently as I could to try and wake him up and rouse him from his sleep, but he was well and truly deceased, and his body lay limp. I checked his chest, and his heartbeat had definitely stopped. So I ran back to the house, sobbing my heart out, inconsolable with grief, as if I had lost my best friend. My mother and brother could not get anything out of me, as I was so terribly upset. I remember my mother said, "Rachel, you're scaring me half to death. Has someone died?" I nodded my head and beckoned for them to follow me back into the woods, but when I returned to the place where I had discovered this extraordinary creature under that tree, his body had mysteriously been evacuated. It was utterly extraordinary, and I was so devastated. "It was here," I said. "A moment ago. It was here. I was here with it." "What was here?" my mother asked, looking mortified. "Rachel, you're scaring me. What was here?" I proceeded to tell them my strange, very peculiar story, and they both looked very perturbed. "Rachel," my mother said, "I've no idea what you saw, because I've never heard of such a creature before. But I'm glad you were there for it in its last moments. No one should ever have to die alone, human or animal." I remember hearing my brother say to my mother, "What the heck did she see?" "I have absolutely no idea," remarked my mother. "But I'll tell you this for nothing. I've never seen Rachel so emotionally stirred up by anything like this before. This event has impacted her life in such a dramatic way. You mark my words." My mother was right, of course. After my interaction with the critter in its dying moments, I was moved so much that I decided when I grew up I wanted to become an EMT. I wanted to help people in harrowing emergency situations and be that reassuring voice for them, especially if they were in death and life situations. I now vehemently believe that the creature I encountered in the woods was, in fact, a Bigfoot. Fast forward a few years and I had trained as an EMT. I still remember the first day of my course as if it was yesterday. There were so many young people, equally as enthusiastic and eager to become EMTs as I was. We were all talking excitedly about the prospects of the job. I still remember the doctor coming into the room with a very sombre expression and telling us that he was going to show us a graphic video about life on the front line dealing with emergency situations, which he warned us was not for the faint-hearted. "Once you've seen the video, and you still want to be an EMT," he told us, "then and only then will I believe you. The job requires nerves of steel." He pointed to a pile of plastic bags. "If any of you need to throw up during the footage," he explained, "they're there for you." I remember thinking, what the heck? How could a video really be that horrific that we might actually need sick bags? Wasn't that not going a little bit overboard? The footage was worse than I could have ever envisaged, and we were eyewitness to the raw emotions, the screaming relatives, and of course all the grisly details of decapitated body parts from shootings, car accidents, and of course suicides. We were shown details of the bodies in graphic detail, like the tissues, the blood, the goo, the brain matter that had all been splattered across the road in an accident, like a box of broken eggs. It didn't get more graphic than that. I'm not going to lie to you and pretend I was all stoic and composed, because like most of the people in the room, I was actually throwing up violently and heaving in a sick bag. But if the video could not have got any worse, it invariably did, and we were seeing graphic scenes of EMTs being beaten up by drunks and physically assaulted in their jobs, which is part of the job description. And I watched all this with great trepidation. When the doctor finally returned back into the room, he asked us if anyone wanted to leave, and more than half of the potential applicants left at once, realising that they could never stomach a job in the front line. I remember the doctor smiling at us and saying, "You see why my job is so easy? Because now I know who's got what it really takes to do the job, without wasting my time with interviews." I think we were being shown this footage to see whether we had the grit and the steel to be able to deal with these challenging life and death situations, and I can assure you that nothing you could have said would have put me off becoming an EMT, because I was absolutely determined to follow what I believed was my life calling. I was to discover that being an EMT was such a rich, intimate experience for me, helping people in all kinds of scenarios, such as deadly car accidents, suicides, assaults, murders and shootings, and believe me, I saw it all. And even the video didn't do justice to what it really was like out there in those harrowing life and death situations, because believe me, it's graphic, it's bloody, and it's horrendous. As is the case with every EMT, there is usually a story that they will never ever forget. And my special story I'd like to share with you and your listeners, that I really believe affirms that there really is life after death. So here is my story. It all happened when I was called out to an area in Charleston at about 9 o'clock at night. It appeared that a very young woman had been shot in the leg by her fiancé, who claimed it had been a dreadful accident. When we arrived at their Charleston home, the boyfriend was so inconsolable with grief and was sitting on the porch crying. He kept saying, "It's my fault, it's my fault, it was an accident, please help her," he begged. I looked at the girl and she stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. "I'm so scared," she said. "I'm sure I'm going to die. Please, please, don't let me die." I remember my hands were shaking violently as I tied a tourniquet on her leg. I could see blood was spraying out of her femoral artery at an alarming rate. "You're going to be fine," I kept reassuring her, although in my gut I knew things weren't looking at all good. The whole patio floor was covered in pools of blood, and I know it sounds weird, but I could actually taste and smell the iron in the air. At this stage my gloved hands were sliding and slipping all over the place from the blood, and my patient started slipping into unconsciousness as my partner was incubating her. I was tightening the tourniquet on her leg because the wound had not stopped bleeding. It was really out of control. Suddenly I heard this loud whooshing sound, which was so audible to me, and I kid you not, I saw the apparition of this woman slide out of her body, much like a card from an envelope. The next thing I knew was that she was seated on the ground, leaning over her body and staring down at herself. I remember she looked startled when she realised she was outside of her body, and she was watching us. She was surprised that we could actually see her. I will never forget her pleading expression on her face as we worked on her, trying to stop the blood flow. I really believe she wanted to live. I've never seen anything like this happen before, and I couldn't make any sense of it at all. Even my EMT partner witnessed this tumultuous event, and we kept working on the poor woman while she watched us so earnestly. But unfortunately we couldn't save her in time, because everything transpired way too quickly, and she'd lost far too much blood. Suddenly the apparition of the girl vanished before us, and we had to cover up her whole body with a sheet. I kept wondering if she was still watching us, and it sent chills down my spine, because I could sense and feel her around us. "Life extinct," I said, 9:06 p.m. "Did you see that?" I asked my partner, shaking. "The girl was outside her own body. She was watching us." "Like hell I saw it," said my partner, looking at me with wide eyes. We saw her ghost. She wanted to live, poor thing, but she's bled out so much we could never have saved her. Suddenly we saw the sobbing fiancé coming racing over to us. What have you done? He screamed, lashing out at me aggressively. You let her die! You let her die! How could you? I trusted you. He started slapping me very hard, in between violent sobs. Sir, I said, please sit down now. Calm down. I didn't kill your fiancé. I want to explain what happened. The bullet hit her femoral artery. She was bleeding out so fast, it was impossible to curtail the bleeding. There was nothing we could do, and the tourniquet was not working. I'm sorry, sir, but there was nothing we could do. Oh, my God! What have I done? Said the fiancé. It's my fault. It's my fault. Now calm down, I said. What happened? Do you remember? I was showing my fiancé how to use the revolver. She's been stalked by a weirdo at work and was certain this man was following her everywhere she went. I told her she needed to learn to use a revolver, and I kept going over and over what she needed to do, and I kept showing her over and over again. She really wasn't getting it easily. I began to show her the safety catch and how to pull the trigger. I kept repeating it because she just couldn't get it into her head how to do it. I was pulling the trigger several times during my demonstration, and the one time when I failed to use the safety catch, the rifle unloaded in her leg. It was an awful mistake. I tried to calm the man down, but he didn't seem to be able to be calmed because he was in such a terrible state. Later, I watched him being led away by the police because they had to take him for some interrogation because obviously he had actually shot her, so he was the prime suspect. Do you really think it was an accident? I asked my partner. Who knows, he said. It's a funny old world, the things that happen out here. They boggle the mind. I wonder if people would believe some of our stories. Probably not, I laughed. I sincerely doubt it. What do you think about the apparition we just saw? I asked him. I think it's proof beyond question that life beyond death really exists, he said. I do not believe we actually die. We live on. So there you are. That's my story. I just want to say that that was the most incredible, incredible story. And I just want to thank you so very much for sending it to us and letting us really understand, Rachel, what it is like to be an EMT on the front line. That story of that girl being outside of her body, looking down on herself, and you actually physically seeing her apparition is shocking. That really is quite something. That must have been very harrowing for you and very traumatic. And as for your encounter with the Bigfoot in the woods, I'm just so grateful that you had the courage and the strength to literally calm that creature down. A lot of people wouldn't have had that amount of courage. But you chose to calm that creature down in its dying moments. And I think when you went back to look for it, it had clearly been taken away by its loved ones who clearly discovered it deceased. It obviously lived a very long life, but you were able to literally tune in to its energy, and it appreciated that so very much. Because I agree with your mother. I don't think anybody would want to die alone. And I think we have an enormous amount in common with Bigfoots. Yes, you do get very aggressive ones out there, but this one was very, very amenable and very congenial. And what a wonderful encounter. Until next time, goodbye and good night.